So for today's player profile, we're going to be discussing Trayce Jackson-Davis. He's about to enter year 2 for the Warriors. Obviously, drafted here in the second round. Considered one of the steals of the draft last season. As a rookie, 1 vote shy from being all rookie second team. And he had a major impact for us last season. I think there's a lot of optimism surrounding Trayce and the potential impact he can have going into next year. Obviously, he was a 4-year college player, so he is 24 years old, and there's an understanding that he may not have the highest potential, but as a solid contributor and a really high-level role player, he's someone that can not only play for the Warriors for a long time, but be a really high-level role player that, improves and is able to be a system fit. So, to begin, Trayce Jackson-Davis last season played 68 games, 16.6 minutes per game, averaging 8 points on 70% shooting from the field, 56% from the free throw line, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block. Obviously, last year, as a rookie, he didn't start the season in the rotation. It took some time. He was expected to be sent to the G League because that was the Warriors' initial plan going into the season, was to have Pods and Trayce go into the G League, develop there, work on their games, improve, and by the time they came back, they'd be more seasoned, they'd be, more comfortable playing a faster style of play and, understanding the system at a high level, the read and react motion offense. But it was apparent pretty early on that they'd picked up on the nuances and the concepts of the system pretty early. And because of that, Trayce showed that he was NBA ready from day one. Those flashes and those indicators also were apparent during Summer League as well when we watched him. Now, again, he's one of the best finishers in the league. You see that 70% field goal percentage? That's one of the top 5 shooting percentages in the entire league last season. And mind you, he only played 16, 17 minutes a game, but he did find himself starting last season, believe it or not. So he went from being a potential G League development candidate to being brought up, coming off the bench, playing some garbage time minutes, then playing backup center minutes, and then starting, taking Kevon Looney's spot, and ultimately taking Draymond's spot at the 5 to slot him back at the 4. So Trayce has overcame a lot in terms of his, up and down nature throughout his career. Nothing has been necessarily consistent yet in terms of playing time and role. However, whenever he's been on the court, he's delivered. And so, starting with his best and greatest strength, he's a defensive anchor. That goes without saying. He came into the league understanding that that was his greatest asset and his greatest ability, is to be a highly skilled shot blocker, anchoring the paint, and being a deterrent at the basket, protecting the rim, right? And he's someone that, monitors cutters and passing lanes, able to understand how plays develop, able to identify what's coming from which angle and how the defense needs to shift to cut that off. So Trayce can really anchor a defense both from a understanding and conceptual standpoint, understanding the scouting report, tendencies, patterns, and the play call, but also from an athleticism standpoint. Because not only does he monitor, the back cuts and the 45 cuts, the V cuts, but he, also is able to understand how to leverage his athleticism in a very, very effective way to deter players at the basket. And so one thing about Trayce last season that was very apparent, he is as positionally sound as they come. Textbook verticality, right? So you didn't see a lot of times Trayce out of position, finding himself undisciplined. He's very fundamentally sound defensively. He understands how to, remain vertical, position himself in a way that is advantageous to the defense, and he has a very solid understanding of the rule book, right? Because a lot of players may not be familiar with the minute details and nuances of how to execute verticality or how to play defense with their feet and not their hands. Trayce does such a good job of managing his athletic tools and his physical attributes and using that to leverage his skill set on the defensive end. He has a 7'1" wingspan, and he has explosive leaping ability. So with those tools, he's able to then deter players at the rim. He, for example, shut down Giannis multiple times when we played the Bucks at home. He was able to stop Jaylen Brown at the basket against Boston. He was able to completely erase, wipe away, deter, and flat out shut down some of the great drivers of the basketball in the league today. We saw him last season do such an effective job at completely shutting the paint down and brought up an idea that he quite possibly might be our best anchor, our best rim protector since Andrew Bogut. And I think that's a fair bar to to claim and to associate with him, because again, Andrew Bogut at the time, however many years ago, you go back around a decade, was one of the best rim protectors in the league, erasing shots. He was a deterrent, and he was someone that understood how to leverage his physical attributes in a way that was advantageous to the defense. And I think Trayce, being a 4-year college player, having the experience, playing through the mistakes, developing over time, I think has come into the NBA and has hit the ground running. There isn't a steep learning curve. There isn't a long adjustment period. He understands how to put himself in the best position possible, primarily as a defensive anchor, but more interestingly, defending in space on switches. There were plenty of times last season, especially early on, where I noticed Trayce's mobility was something that, at the 6'9" frame that he has, popped off the screen. His ability to slide his feet laterally, east to west, stay in front of guards such as Malik Monk, 6-man of the year candidates, some of the shiftiest, shakiest guards that are able to break you down with their dribble and get to their spots. Trayce did a phenomenal job of staying in front of them, moving his feet laterally, not getting beat, and contesting without fouling, using his length, understanding how to guard in space, understanding distance and how to manage that, and then get a clean contest. And those nuances, that ability of depth perception, of understanding distance and how to contest properly, these details add up for clean and positive defensive possessions that we've seen time and time again when Trayce is on the floor. Discipline and execution. And that's what he represents. Now, again, he's also a highly competent drop coverage big. So even if he's not switching out, even if he's not protecting the rim, he can play drop. He can guard, play the two-man game where he's guarding the ball handler and then retreating back to the roll man. He understands how to play the cat and mouse game in a very effective way that can shut down a pick and roll quite effectively. So Trayce Jackson-Davis's defense is his greatest attribute. That cannot be understated. He was probably a top 3 defender for us last season. You could even argue he was maybe our best. You would put him in the class of what Draymond was. Obviously, Wiggins towards the end of the season picked it up. And he was the one that really set the stage and set the tone for us last season. So ultimately, one of the things that I want to point out with Trayce is that he is a multi-positional defender. He can guard comfortably 4s and 5s, and he can occasionally switch out on the perimeter and do a very good job. Ali makes a good point. He definitely schooled Wemby. Did a very good job defensively on him. Used his length, used his mobility and his agility to stay with him. Wemby is as agile as they come at his frame and size. So for Trayce to be able to keep up with him the way he did, we watched Trayce also keep up with Giannis, as I mentioned earlier. So Trayce has shown the ability to really do a fantastic job against more mobile and nimble bigs, right? There's a lot of nimble bigs who are light on their feet, able to, get to the rim or use their handle, break a defense down. But Trayce has done a phenomenal job against those players, especially in only year 1 as a rookie. To be able to deliver and execute at that level cannot be understated. And again, we've seen him in drop coverage. We've seen him just, camping in the paint, roaming as a rim protector and doing a great job of rotating on time on target. And his weak side rim protection is his greatest attribute. Now, another thing to point out, he's an outstandingly productive rebounder. He is someone that's going to crash the boards consistently. He's going to scarf down rebounds, and he's going to, box out, be physical. You're going to feel his presence. He's not going to be soft on the glass. He's active on the boards. And That's one thing about him that is very, very unique. There's a lot of centers that may be able to protect the rim, such as Brook Lopez. However, Brook Lopez is not a great rebounder. He is not. Statistically, he does not rebound very well at his size and for the position that he plays. And so when you look at a Trayce Jackson-Davis, who is able to rebound 5 times a game last season in only 16 minutes, you come to think of, him being one of the best combinations of not only shot blocking and rim protection, but also rebounding. Did you guys know that last season, Trayce Jackson-Davis and Brook Lopez averaged the same amount of rebounds within a fraction? They averaged the same amount of rebounds within a fraction. And Brook Lopez played twice as many minutes. Twice as many minutes. So that goes to my point. Trayce is not only a great rim protector, but he's a phenomenal rebounder. And you have centers in the league that can be really good rim protectors like Brook Lopez, but are they quite as good rebounders? I don't believe so. And so that's a very rare combination that you can find. Now, one of the other things that I want to point out, how great of a second jump Trayce has to really pick up offensive rebounds. Because he's able to crash the offensive glass time and time again. And what he does is, when he boxes out, he's able to, initially, if he misses a shot, pull down another rebound like Moses Malone, or on a second shot for a teammate, if he kicks it out, he's able to reset positioning and put himself in a position to actually bring another rebound down. His second jump is something that's very underrated. And that speaks to his vertical explosiveness and his athleticism, because that second jump gives him an advantage over maybe slower, stiffer bigs that may not have as much pop. Now, more strengths here. He's a perfect and an unequivocal system fit. Part of the reason why I knew coming into the NBA, Trayce Jackson-Davis would be an unequivocally positive for us was because watching him in college in Indiana, running a lot of the same motion offense, running a lot of the same schemes, concepts, and patterns, understanding how to play in a system where the big is a playmaker. And that's exactly what his role was last season for us, at times. At times, he was play finishing, but at times, he was playmaking. And one of the things that he was doing was making decisions as a big man, the same way we've seen Andrew Bogut over the years, Kevon Looney over the years, Nemanja Bjelica over the years. We've seen bigs come into the Warriors and make decisions as the trigger man, as the pivot point. And that is something, as the hub of the offense, you're expected to execute on. And Steve Kerr trusted him to develop that throughout the course of the season. He did a very good job. One of which was putting him in positions to operate within dribble handoffs, right? DHOs to free up shooters like Clay, like Steph, his ability to dive to the rim or even run fake dribble handoffs, which is something he picked up on towards the end of the season, I'd guess from Draymond. And understanding how to read the defense, read the game, and how to just read and react in accordance with that. And I think Trayce developed that ability as the season went on. He became more and more comfortable. And those DHOs are just one example of something that he added to his repertoire and something that he's also looking forward to working on this summer in terms of coming into next season even more polished and refined. And so when you really look at his skill set and the totality of what he can do as a playmaker, I think there's a lot of promise there. And there's still room to grow, but I think he's shown a really good start to his career so far. Another thing that he's shown the ability to do is being a great passer in the short roll. His ability to make reads off of traps or coming off of screens where Klay Thompson is coming off a curl or Steph Curry runs a DHO and two defenders run at them. Trayce's ability to roll, catch the pass, take a couple dribbles, stop at the free throw line or a little bit closer to the basket, and then make a play to either a cutter or a shooter in the corner. We've seen Trayce make some outstanding passes and some phenomenal reads throughout the course of last season where he was able to identify where the defense was rotating and then was able to pinpoint and make the right play, whether it was, again, to a cutter or a shooter in the corner. And he's done a phenomenal job with that. And that's something that he was comfortable with even in college. Watching his tape and his film in college, one thing that was very apparent was that he did have playmaking chops. He did have the ability to read the floor and unique court vision for a big. So finding shooters, finding cutters for someone of his size and of his position to be that proficient at that, I think it's commendable, and I think it's something that we must identify and continue to hone in on, continue to grow. Now, again, the DHOs we're going to see next year, that's a bread and butter principle of our offense. I think we're going to see more things such as, slip screens, ghost screens. I'm sure we're going to see more fake DHOs, just different variations of playmaking from Trayce. We're going to see some split actions, I'm sure, right? Some split actions, some maybe mid post or elbow actions where we're running some motion offense, and Trayce will be tasked. Trayce will be responsible for making plays, for being able to distribute and to facilitate and be the trigger man. And I think that's something invaluable to our offense because, again, that is one of the core mainstays, one of the pillars of a Steve Kerr offense, a playmaking big. So, again, the other side of the coin now is Trayce's ability to be an athletic lob threat, rim running, right? Sprinting the floor in transition. This is something that Steve has emphasized over the past, few years from his bigs. He emphasized it with Wiseman. He asked James Wiseman, James, I want you to run the floor as hard as you can, north to south quickness, and being able to put pressure on the defense, get efficient, easy, quick buckets in transition. I think that is invaluable. That is efficient offense, and it's something that you really can take advantage of and exploit within another team because that's a very, very, unique weapon. Not a lot of teams have bigs that can run the floor like that. So one thing that Trayce does really well is run to the basket, and his rim running ability, I think, developed and improved as the season went on last year. He got more comfortable understanding how to position himself, where to be on the court, and how to effectively place himself to then finish, whether it's a lob or whether it's just a straight down the middle, finish at the basket. And we saw it, especially in that Bucks game, that stands out to me, where he really found a good rhythm in doing that. Now, again, sprinting the floor hard is something that Steve is going to ask of Trayce again this season. So don't expect him to, slow down by any means. Trayce is going to continue to run the floor hard, get easy, quick points in transition and opportunities, and I think he's going to take advantage of that because that's one of the points of emphasis Steve had over the offseason. It's a clear point of emphasis. Again, vertical spacing, invaluable. This is one of the most key attributes you can ask for in a big man, is having a player that can space vertically, that can put pressure on the defense, and be a unique and outstanding threat from a lob standpoint. It's another counter for the offense to look at, right? If you get stuck in the middle, if you get stuck with the ball, you want to run a pick and roll, you have a lob threat, that's another option within the flow of the offense. The more options you have, the better position you can be in to run effective offense and to then put pressure on the defense to rotate and have to value each and every threat, whether it's a shooter or whether it's a player, from a lob position in the dunker spot. So that's one thing that Trayce does really well, right? In the dunker spot or just in the pick and roll, diving to the rim. He's a fundamentally sound screener. He's not perfect, but he does understand the art and the positioning of screen setting. Again, we mentioned in our last player profile with Kevon Looney, that is something that he can improve on. And Kevon is tasked as the veteran of this team, as the veteran resident big of this team, to pass down the tricks of the trade, the nuances, the little, details and the ways that you can use your body to your advantage, the angles, all of these little nuances, Trayce Jackson-Davis can pick up on from Kevon Looney. So my hope is that Loon next season can pass down some advice to improve Trayce even further as a screen setter, because I think he's already decent, but I think there's still levels he can get to. And if he does, that'll create more separation between the ball handler and defender, and that'll create even more space for that player to probe, whether it's Pods, whether it's Steph, or what have you. That is a key fundamental, approach to the offensive end, right? Is understanding how to set screens and not only on the ball but off the ball, right? Freeing up shooters and freeing up movement right? Cutting, all of that. Pick and roll finishing ability as well. Like I said, shot 71% from the field. Trayce Jackson-Davis. That is nothing to write home about. I mean, 71% from the field is one of the best percentages you can think of in the NBA. Daniel Gafford is one of the few that come to mind that might be better, but very few players come even close to how efficiently Trayce Jackson was shooting the ball, and he took a very select few shots. He wasn't someone that was taking, a lot of floaters or, mid-range shots. He is someone that's going to live in the dunker spot. He's going to dive hard. He's going to play in transition. He's going to be a lob threat. He's going to cut, and he's going to, put himself in a position to be efficient offensively and execute. And again, his pick and roll finishing ability is one of the best in the league, and it's quite easily the best on the Warriors. We haven't had a player like this. This was exactly what I'm sure Steve envisioned with Wiseman, but Wiseman still had a lot of growth and learning to do, and a steep curve to understand how to position himself properly, how to angle himself, how to be physical and be a presence in his area of the court. And so I think one thing that Trayce has done a good job of is put himself in a position to space the court even further than what we've seen in years past, right? We've seen guys like Dario and JaMychal and Otto. Even with Otto spacing the floor as a shooter, he wasn't necessarily a lob threat, and neither was Nemanja Bjelica. Our only lob threats in 2022 were GP2 and occasionally Wiggins. But we didn't really have a lob threat, right? Looney wasn't that either. And so this is a unique player that we have that, we really haven't had a weapon like this in a long time. And I think we can take full advantage of this because, again, he's still 24 years old. He can still improve and grow and learn and get better. But at the same time, he's seasoned enough to play right now and to play at a high level and contribute as a high-level role player. Now, one of the most nuanced things, one of the most sneaky things that Trayce has added in terms of a wrinkle to his offense and to his game is the slip screens. The slip screens are essentially the ability to come up, set a screen, and then slip to the basket because you don't really fully set the screen. On a slip screen, it seems like you're about to set the screen, and then you instead dive hard to the basket, where the defense comes up, the big man comes up, ready to defend the pick and roll, but then you as the screener divert and you actually dive to the basket and you completely throw that defender off the misdirection, and that allows easy shots at the basket. We've seen players like Sean Livingston, Kevon Looney, even Kevin Durant, Wiggins, Andre Iguodala. We've seen tons of players run these types of actions. Even Jordan Bell, right? These slip screen actions. Draymond has done it many times where they're coming up to set a screen and instead they completely divert and dive to the basket. They don't set a full screen, and that essentially creates advantages and openings. JaVale McGee, Zaza. So these are things that we can take advantage of with Trayce because he is faster than traditional bigs. He is quicker on his feet. He's light on his feet. So he's not a slow big that's going to be stiff and can't really move up and slip these screens effectively. No, he can do it because he has light on his feet. He's someone that's quick twitch, right? He's an athlete. He has vertical leaping ability. So when you have a player with these physical tools and these gifts and this skill set, I think we have to take full advantage of it. And we can run 3 slip screens a game and get 4 points out of it every single game. And that adds up. That efficient, effective offense adds up. So we have to look to continue to do that and emphasize that area of his game because that also creates advantages for others. If he slips the screen and then the corner man rotates down the middle to tag the roller, then that leaves the corner shooter open, and that's a wide open shot dotted to the corner. So you understand, and Trayce, like I said earlier, is fully capable of not only making that read, but executing that pass because that is something that's in his arsenal from a playmaking standpoint as well. So beyond even scoring from a slip screen standpoint, he can even play make in an advantage situation if the defense effectively rotates. He's capable of making that play. Bubba, do you have any other strengths that you want to point out?
No, man. I think you did a great job. We covered everything, right? So yeah, no, I think you were very detailed with this. I got nothing to add.
Appreciate that. Yeah. All right, now let's go to weaknesses. As far as weaknesses for Trayce, he's slightly undersized at 6'9", 245. Obviously, he is an undersized big, right? He's not 7 feet. He's not going to, bully you and bruise you like a Jokic or an Embiid. He's someone that's a little bit slighter in frame. He's not necessarily, has a strong core or a strong base. He might get bumped and bullied a little bit at times. We saw it even last year. He kind of struggled to guard Jokic a little bit. So I think with Trayce, one of the things I've noticed is he struggled to guard elite bigs in the post. He's not someone that I want to throw on Joel Embiid. He's not someone that I prefer to throw on Nikola Jokic or Karl Anthony Towns even. I prefer him guarding maybe, the more slender, slimmer frames, right? Like a Chet Holmgren maybe, right? Maybe Chet would be a good example of a player that I would throw him on. Um, that's one name. But there's other names around the league that I would consider too. Even like a Giannis, I think he could do a very good job on. We've seen Trayce defend Giannis quite effectively when he goes downhill, at blocking his shots, staying with him, and sliding his feet laterally to really, and also absorbing those bumps, absorbing those, those push-offs, and really sticking with him. So from a physical standpoint, I think Trayce is more equipped to guard players that are slimmer in frame. And, he's only 245 pounds. So to ask him to guard 260, 270-pound players is not really fair to him, right? That's not necessarily something his body is built to do because he hasn't necessarily had the experience or the reps in doing so. However, again, his inability, and I've said this before. Oh, what's up, Jim? And Jim makes a good point. He said, should hope this becomes less of a problem in the coming season with added strength. Very good point, Jim. Very good point. And guess what? We're going to get to that in expectations because you're absolutely right. Trayce Jackson-Davis added some strength this offseason, and we can hope that his post defense improves and he's in a better position to guard some of the more physically imposing bigs like a Jokic or a Cat in the league if he adds that 10 to 15 pounds of muscle, which we expect him to, because he said that was one thing that he was going to do. And we saw him in summer league as well look a little bit more toned and chiseled. Now, one of the other issues is his inability to space the floor, right? His inability to space the floor is something that's a fundamental problem because from a vertical standpoint, he provides a lob threat, yes. But from a perimeter standpoint, there's still something left to be desired, right? There's a lack of perimeter shot making. He's not someone that's going to shoot the ball, shoot the three or the mid-range, pick and pop. That element of his game is completely removed. It's completely non-existent. And so because of that, that's something that we have to take into consideration when it comes to counters, right? His counters may not be as of a wide variety because, yes, he can pick and roll. He can, be a lob threat. He can slip screens. He can, cut off the ball. But one thing he can't necessarily do is pick and pop or, take a jumper at the elbow, shoot the corner three quite yet. Those are things that are still not part of his game. And when you don't have that perimeter spacing, that could be an issue in terms of what the defense can do to exploit that. And then again, he's not a great free throw shooter. That's something that was apparent last year. He only shot 56% at the free throw line. I think that's an area that he can work on, and I think I expect him to be a better free throw shooter going into next season. Watching him in Summer League, I actually think he did a very good job of knocking his free throws down. He had a few games where he was shooting 7 of 10, 8 for 10 at the line. So there's some flashes there of improvement, and I hope that we see him, bump up that percentage, maybe 10 points, 5 to 10 points or so, get to like the mid 60s. And I think if Trayce can be in the mid 60s, that'll be a very good advantage for us. Now, another thing I will say is he's a very left-hand dominant finisher, right? So he's someone that's going to be dominant with his left hand. He's not someone that's going to use his right hand very often. He's very, very used to his left hand. He's very used to driving the ball with his left hand, using his left hand in finishing actions. And that's something that's been apparent for years, even dating to his college days in Indiana, right? That he's been doing that for a while. And I think adding that right hand is a key to his game that can expand his offensive repertoire. I could give him a little bit more comfort in terms of the positions and the angles he's given at times, because that's something the defense can kind of force you into, a more uncomfortable shot attempts, a more uncomfortable shot diet. And so that's really what I'm looking at, ultimately. Now, he does struggle at times. I think last year we saw him struggle going to his right a little bit. What do you guys think? Would you agree with that? Would you say that he struggled at times, maybe when the defense was forcing him to the right hand, to maybe finish effectively or consistently? Was that something that you guys saw, or do you guys think he
Oh,
got better as the
definitely,
season went on?
definitely. That's something he has to get better at. I've also noticed like he's too dominant with that left, right? When they force him with that right, he struggles to finish, and then he won't like he'll try to go with that left, with that right, and then he'll try to switch to the left mid air, right? And it kind of affects his shot. So he's just gotta get better at finishing with both hands because if he can't, that's just gonna impact him as a player. Because right now it's fine, right? It was his rookie year, but teams have a time to scout you now. So if you're not careful, teams can exploit that, right? That will limit his finishing ability, right? So we need him to develop that right hand as well. I think it'll just make
100%.
him a more dynamic finisher. And what's up, Jim? How you doing, man?
Yeah, let's welcome Jim back. What's up, Jim? How you doing, man?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you still hear me?
Yep.
What's going on, Dre?
What up? How we doing?
How you been? How's your summer been?
Been very good, man. We've been talking Warriors every day. Haven't missed a day. Twice a day for the last year and a half, really. I mean, I haven't missed a day all summer. So we've been talking about the Warriors. We've been doing the breakdowns. A lot of good and fun stuff. And the media day is less than a week away, man. So I'm excited.
That's some incredible dedication on your part. So good to hear
Appreciate
you've
that.
been going nonstop. And yeah, I mean everybody else in the chat. Really great to see some old faces here. Haven't talked to you guys in forever, so appreciate y'all. And yeah, I have quite a summer. I went to Korea for a little over a month. I went for the first time in 26 years. So that was a long time coming, and I had a lot of adventures there. But I'll save that for, I guess, once I start up strength again or something along those lines. Um, yeah, that's just the gist of my summer, and yeah, it's good. Is feels nice to be back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What do you think about what we're saying right now about Trayce, his right hand maybe being a weakness? Is that something you saw last year? By the way, did you hear what we were talking about with the strengths as well?
Yes, I caught the. Did I catch the tail end of that? In the strength part, I was
Mm-hmm.
looking for his defense as a part of his strength.
Oh yeah, we I had two slides. So the
Oh, okay.
defense was the first slide. But yeah, you'll see it on YouTube when I post this, and you can also post this on your YouTube if you want. And I went through a 10-minute breakdown of like each and individual like area of his defense, his switchability, his rim protection, like literally went through everything in detail. So you should definitely check that out. And we're just going to cover the weaknesses. Once we finish the weaknesses, we're going to go to expectations. And I want to know what your expectations are for Trayce. But what do you think about the right hand? You think his right hand is something that he struggled with last year? Did you see that at all?
I mean, we all know that he's a lefty and he's never been strong in going to his right. I think when it comes to Trayce, he didn't get a whole lot of opportunities. He's basically just, he's just rim rolling and he's just trying to finish everything. So I don't think he got the kind of opportunity that, he didn't have a chance to show really a whole lot of what he can do. But definitely from the right side, we've seen, I think I think I've seen him blow some layups trying to go up with the right. So no disagreement there.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And in terms of hunting blocks, is that something you'd agree with? So one of the weaknesses I mentioned was sometimes he hunts blocks a little bit much. He overhelps and kind of tilts the defense a little bit to the point where he's looking to block a shot or contest, and rather than kind of staying home or living with the floater, he'll kind of leave his man and sometimes he needs to box out more instead of just over helping on the driver to the basket or someone that gets to the rim. Like, what do you think about that? Do you think that's something that he struggled with a little bit last year?
I think boxing out is what was one of my favorite parts about his game is that he's there all the time,
Hmm.
right? So I don't know about that, but in terms of hunting for blocks, definitely he did a lot of that, and I
Hmm.
think we saw some reports on it actually where there were comments about it, and they were trying to get him to find a balance of that,
Right.
where
Right.
right where you just can't be going for blocks every time if you see that your man is not being covered for. I thought that that was more of a team defense issue. You know what I mean? Like, of course, if Trayce is gonna go and help somebody, it's a natural action, a natural reaction for somebody to take his place, right? The problem was that that wasn't happening a lot of the times. So then Trayce goes for the block, and then his man is open for the putback, and then he looks bad. Something along those lines. The defense has to be unified, and it has to be on a string, and that wasn't happening a lot of the times. And so I thought that that was a part of the problem when it came to him hunting for blocks. Um, but I do think that he could find a better balance of that from an overall standpoint. I think
Hmm.
he tried to do more of that as the season went on, and because of that, I felt like there were some shots that he could have gone after that he kind of didn't as the season kind of uh, winded down. So yeah.
100%. 100%. Now, I want to also get to this last bullet here. Leaks out before fully setting screens. I think this is something you in particular brought up last year, which is sometimes Trace will come up to set the screen and doesn't necessarily plant both feet, set it fully, and allow the offensive player to try to get around it. He sometimes leaks out too early, and that's a management situation because I understand sometimes he wants to slip it or dive, but what do you think about him maybe like tweaking that in terms of his screen setting and being a bit more sturdy, stable, and set on some of them?
Yeah, I think that was one of my biggest issues with him is the lack of strength in his screens. I thought he slips almost every time, and it's a little selfish, right? Because when you're slipping every time, you're not really looking to get your shooters as open as you could, get them to, especially when you're playing with Clay and Steph and stuff like this, right? You got to try to get them open if you can, instead of looking to slip it every time. Now, it was pretty effective when he did it with Clay because Clay would, find him every time on the slip, and that was really good. But yeah, I think he needs to find a better balance of when to understand when to set a really strong screen to get a shooter open versus him looking to slip it. And then, what happens when you slip is the shooter is going to end up having two on him, right? So the shooter is going to have a hard time getting his shot up if Trayce is just going to slip it every time. That's no good. So for sure, I hope that this is a lesson that both Looney and Draymond can kind of teach him so that he finds a better balance of that. I think, I guess everything that I have to say about Trayce is about just finding a better balance of everything, because how I feel about Trayce. I still think he's a vital part of what the Warriors are capable of doing in this upcoming season. But you're right when it comes to the whole strength thing. There were times where he got bullied by bigger players, and that's an issue. You can't have that. So, like I said, hopefully he added enough strength and enough grit so that come this upcoming season, he doesn't have the same issues where he's just getting bullied. He has to be able to hold his ground better when guys are trying to back him down and stuff like this.
Are there any other weaknesses that you thought we should identify or point out before we move on to expectations? Anything else? I mean, this was kind of the rundown of what I had, but I just brought up that he's a little undersized, like you mentioned, maybe struggles to guard in the post at times, doesn't really stretch the floor in terms of jump shooting, primarily left-handed, hunts blocks, and then kind of doesn't set screens fully. Is there anything else you thought of?
In terms of weaknesses, I think you covered it really well. The slipping thing is a huge thing. Being able to set better screens is a huge thing. Sure, hunting for blocks too often is a thing. But again, I think that would be less of a thing if you had the defense more on a string, right? So we'll see about that. And yeah, in terms of shooting, well, this is the thing, I guess, is what I guess is the best thing to talk about when you go into expectations.
And in terms of before we move on, I just want to make sure everything that you want to say is said. We brought up in terms of strengths. I talked about him being a system fit, an athletic lob threat, a defensive anchor, and a very productive rebounder as well. Very, very dominant in that from that standpoint. If you look at his rebounds per game, I actually compared him to Brook Lopez. He averaged as many rebounds as Brook Lopez in essentially half the minutes, which is incredible because, you know, Brook Lopez is one of the best shot blockers, but from a rebounding standpoint, Trayce is just in a different stratosphere. And so that was one comparison I made. But is there anything else that you would add to this before we go to expectations?
I think you covered it some based on the bullet point in terms of his perimeter defense. It said that he's a good drop coverage defender. Is that what it said?
Yep.
Okay.
I said as far as his defense goes, one of the things I said was he's a very competent drop coverage big. And the reason I said that was because I noticed he did a very good job of being able to play the two-man game, the cat and mouse game between the ball handler and the big at times. Sometimes he got beat, but I think he did a very good job for the most part, especially for a rookie, kind of managing that in space, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody gets beat at some point, right? But I love his mobility out, out from the 3-point line, just in the mid-range area. When he gets switched, I don't think that there's a whole lot of bigs like a center who can do the things that he does in terms of staying in front of just speedy guys that usually drive around these bigs that come up, which is why a lot of bigs play drop, right? Because they can't go up and guard these guards. They'll just blow right by them. Right, that's the problem, and it's part of the advantage of playing drop coverage. You don't have to do that, but Trayce is capable of doing that, so it makes him such a versatile defender. It's basically in terms of perimeter defense. You remember when Looney used to be able to play some perimeter defense against a guy like James Harden, like that. That's kind of something that's always stuck in our mind.
Harden. Yeah, 100%.
But James Harden is like a crafty guy. You know what I mean? He's not some speed demon that will blow by you with his first step. Like he'll kind of lull you to sleep before he does that. You know what I mean? And he kind of gets you with that shot.
He doesn't have like a Ja Morant first step, right?
Sure, yeah. Something along with like a De'Aaron Fox or something. You know what I mean? Like a Malik Monk. Some really quick guys in the league. And that's one thing that Trayce can really do well is stay in front of guys and force them to make if they do get up, make a really tough, shot over the outstretched arms of Trayce. He's contesting it. He's there for the contesting. He's not getting blown by and forcing the defense to rotate and all this. You know what I mean? So that makes him a really unique defender at the center spot. And we'll see, how much better he is in that regard, because if there's a weakness I could say about that is that he's much better at stopping smaller guys than guys that are a little bit bigger, if that makes sense. Let's say, for example, like Franz Wagner or something, right? I think he's an inch taller than Trayce, actually. So when a guy like that goes downhill, sure, Trayce can stay in front of him, but he's not always able to get to deter the shot as much as he does against smaller guys, because they throw a little body into him and all this guy. So there's different factors in terms of how much he can deter, right? But he's there every time. That's all you can ask for if you're a coach or anybody just watching somebody defend, is that sure, you can't stop everybody. Sure, you have your limitations in terms of, he's 6'9", so that is undersized at the center spot, but is he there to contest every time? Is he doing his job? Is he doing what he's supposed to do? And that he does. So you can always kind of rely on him from a that he'll do the right things and he'll be there. And that's, to me, that's huge. I always talk about fundamentals, right? Whether the coach, whether the players, whether they have the fundamentals right, so that we don't have to worry about like, damn, like this is fundamentally broken. Like this can't be good. You know what I mean? I don't have to worry about that with Trayce. So, so yeah, that's my whatever I can remember, because my mind has not been on basketball for the last few months. But this is what I recall.
So, and then on top of all these strengths, and I think you did a really good job of outlining them, putting it all together, what do you think in terms of expectations? The way I see it is he'll have a consistent role and minutes at center. I see him being our defensive anchor, an elite rim protector, aggressive rebounding. He'll play in the motion offense as a play finisher, diving to the basket, running the floor. I think he'll be the trigger man, running the DHOs, high post playmaking. Those are the scenarios I see him in the most. And you mentioned earlier about him building up his body and his strength to guard better in the post. And I see him also, he mentioned being more offensive minded and attacking the basket more frequently next year, just being more aggressive.
Oh, did
So
he?
Yeah.
Okay, that's huge.
hmm Yeah, and on top of that, I think he even brought up the possibility of adding like a corner three. Um, so I think with Trayce, he's shown the ability to have a very high floor as a player. I think the baseline expectation of him is being that defensive anchor and being a trigger man in the motion offense, play finishing, being that lob threat, all of that. What do you think? Would you add anything to this? Would you expand on it? Like, do you think that that's sufficient enough sort of breakdown? Would you say?
Okay, so in terms of expectations, because it wasn't so much I mean, everybody knows I talked up Trayce, right? Since preseason, and I was devastated when Steve refused to play him and all this stuff, right? And hopefully, enough people can see why that was. When you know that defense had been such a huge problem for this team, size was such an issue, and Steve just keeps going with tiny lineups, and get this guy, this anchor guy is sitting right there, and he's just not being used at all. Obviously, that's beyond frustrating if you're rooting for a team and you want the team to win, and you know that great defense is what helps the team win, and then the team is doing just everything the opposite of what's great defense. In order to play great defense, you have to have great personnel on the floor to play defense, and that wasn't happening. So in that regard, I can expect Trayce to be much more involved, and I don't know if he's going to start the season. I would think, right after what happened last season, that it makes the most sense for him to start moving forward, but I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how they're going to operate. So we'll see about that. But in terms of what did he improve in the off season and what can we expect from him, I'm very curious about his shooting. That's something that, I talked a little bit in the off season about. That's something that Trayce had talked about, that the coaches brought up to him to work on his shot. And I wonder if that will be implemented in any way, because obviously that would just change the entire dynamics of Trayce and what we think of him, right? That's a game changer. Does he feel comfortable enough to shoot that in the games? I don't know. And so I think these are some things that we can look out for. We know that the offense will be different because Terry Stotts is on the team now, which is, I think that's pretty amazing when I think about it. That's a head coach, and he gave the Warriors some problems, and he had everybody shooting. He had like Al-Farouq Aminu shooting. He had that big white dude shooting. What's his name?
Myers Leonard.
Yeah, that's right. Right. I remember in one of the playoff games, this dude was killing. I think he had like 15 points or something crazy like that in a quarter in a playoff game. Right. So that's, to me, something like that is Terry Stotts. He enables and empowers his players to feel comfortable and confident in taking the shots when they're open. You know what I mean? So will he encourage that, and will he implement that among the the centers that are on the Warriors. Even Looney was, talking about shooting threes or something like this, right? I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if that would be the case. They also have the new draft pick kid, so I don't know how they're gonna do that. But I do feel like with the stats on board, they're gonna try to get everybody to shoot more, and that may include the centers. Will that include Trayce? I don't know, but I'm hoping so.
Okay, and then on top of kind of what you laid out with stats, um, I do expect Trace to be more offensive minded just in general because I think that's something that Steve really the motion offense, again, the bread and butter that we run in, the DHOs at the top of the key, right? Looney does it, Draymond's done it. That I expect Trace to fill in. Play finishing, again, that remains the same. One thing that I found interesting though from a defensive standpoint was Jerry Stackhouse mentioned on radio. This was maybe like 3 weeks ago. He said that he likes Trayce a lot. He said that he views him as someone who is switchable, who can guard possibly 1 through 5. He likes the idea of having Trayce as like a versatile, switchable defender. And he even mentioned like possibly playing him at the 4. Now I know the last time we saw that in the playing game, or in the playing game, it didn't go too well, right? Obviously, he struggled, on Harrison Barnes and was kind of out of position at times, looked a little bit lost. Do you think it's a mistake if we play him at the 4 next season at any point, or do you think that's okay to experiment with because he is lighter on his feet compared to most centers, so he can guard some wings if you know what I'm saying. But again, would it be ideal? It's tough to say. But I do think that they might experiment with it, given what Stackhouse said in particular.
That's interesting. Again, I think that depends on what are his offensive capabilities. Can he shoot the ball to any capacity? If he can, that may open up the opportunity to try him at power forward, right? I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with trying Trayce at power forward. The problem with what happened in the play-in is that they didn't play him at power forward the whole season. And then you decide to try him at power forward in a one-off. Like, that's what didn't make sense to me. You have to know what to expect in situations like that, right? When the stakes are the highest, you had to have tried it in the regular season before you just randomly try it in a one-off game. That doesn't make any sense to me. So that's what was frustrating about it. Now, if they try him at power forward center at different times, try different combinations now that the Warriors have, more bigs on the team, that'll be interesting to see. That's something that hopefully we can see and determine whether that's a good look or not. You know what I mean? That's not something we can just be like, oh, that's a bad idea. We should never do that. Like, you know what I mean? That doesn't make any sense. But again, whatever it is that you want to do down the line in the playoffs, play in, whatever, make sure you try it in the regular season first. That's what the regular season is for, to try a bunch of shit that you may go to, depending on what situation you run into, the later in the season it gets, right? You have to try it in the regular season before you just run it willy-nilly in the playoffs. And that's what they did, and that was the problem. So I'm not surprised that Jerry Stackhouse likes him a lot. I don't know what coach wouldn't like this guy. This guy does everything that you tell him to do, never complains about anything ever. You know what I mean? So
100%, 100%. And one of the most underrated aspects of his game last season in particular, I think he showed the ability to guard some wings even, right? So there were times that he was switched out onto the occasional, 3 or 4, and he did a really good job of just kind of staying home, understanding when to help off, and that defensive balance is tough. Not a lot of fives can do that. Now, one of the things that I will mention is Trayce did struggle with guarding the Lucas and the LeBrons of the world, right? They were picking on him mercilessly at times. I do wonder how Trayce this season will hold up against the elite stars of the game, because that is something he did struggle with last year. Obviously, most players struggle against the top 10 players in the league, but I'm just saying, is there any room for Trayce to figure out and grow? From that standpoint, we'll have to find out, because I think film work, working with the assistant coaches, putting him in a position to succeed. I think all of those things are, a challenge. But I think it'll take some time. It'll take some time to put Trayce in a position to feel comfortable guarding the top perimeter wings in the league. Because, for example, you remember against Luka, right? How that went the first matchup, and LeBron on the road in LA, he kind of had his with Trayce. So, do you think he can get to the point where he's more comfortable guarding those elite wings?
I thought that Trayce. Sorry, I only caught like the end of what you were saying because I had a phone call. But uh, in terms of Trayce being able to guard more elite players, that's a really good question. I mean, obviously, Luca is a huge standard. I've seen him do well against Luca. I've also seen Luca just make shots over him, very difficult, tough shots. Trayce always had a hand in his face, and he still made it anyway. And that's what superstars do. Um, can Trayce be better in that regard? I'm not sure. That's something that I have to continue to watch as the games come along this season, and just watch game to game how he's able to stay in front of guys. That's I don't know how many centers can stay with Luca and be able to guard him one on one. I don't know how many guys can do that, but I do think that Trayce is capable of doing it. Yeah, I mean that's about as far as I can say. Really, again, it is something that I said before is the size thing is a huge factor with Trayce. The smaller the guy that you're guarding is, the easier it is for Trayce to bother that player. Um, the bigger meaning like 6'6" and up, it gets a little bit easier. I feel Trayce will always be there. He'll always contest the shot and make it tough. But there are guys that are bigger that I've seen just have more success, just finishing over him. You know what I mean? So I think that that's a huge factor. I do think that when you consistently, Dre, like, even though we saw um, Luca like have his moments against Trayce early on in the game, I think that great defense it's like when you're there every time, possession by possession, and you're contesting everything, right, the whole game, that sets a tone for how the rest of the game is going to go, especially in the second half. If you remember what I said last
Mm-hmm.
season, I said Trayce is more of a second half impact player than a first half player, because when you set the tone for how you're going to defend these guys, even if they make some shots early on here and there, they know that, oh shit, okay, I made it. But as the game goes, the later it goes, the more tired you get. But you know that this guy's going to be in your face every time, and that makes it harder for the other team, their offense, knowing that this guy's going to be there. And that's where I've seen Trey shine, and that's why I wanted him to be a closer, because he was reliable enough. Put him next to Draymond and Wiggins, and I thought that that was a really, really, really formidable, group of defenders, and and that's considering that they didn't have a real defensive guy, on their bench, like a Jerry Stackhouse. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
imagine with a
Mm-hmm.
guy like that and how much damage that a combination like that has the potential to do. So that's how I feel about it.
Now, tying in, I want to mention something. So I don't know if you listened to this. I don't want to get you riled up, but Steve did an interview yesterday with Tim Kawakami. Did you listen to that?
No.
Okay. One of the things he said was he isn't necessarily in favor of playing a JK, Draymond, Trayce lineup because he doesn't like the spacing of it. He thinks that he wouldn't want to play JK at the three, even though he views JK as a three naturally. He doesn't prefer to play him there in a lineup without a stretch five. So is there anything you think TJD can do, or is there anything, like how do you feel about that? Do you think we should lean into defense, like with those three front court players? Do you think if Trayce adds maybe like a corner shot to his game, shoots maybe like somewhere in the low 30s, maybe nothing high volume, but the occasional three just for a little spacing? How do you see that in terms of lineup versatility?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, this is now, now we're getting into other players, and I don't know what Kuminga is going to look like. I'm sure he put in a shit ton of work in the offseason, hopefully on both ends of the floor. And honestly, for me, if he comes back a better defender, right, and his offense is going to continue to get better, I think the 3-point shooting is something that we've been looking for in terms of consistency from Kuminga, because he's shown so many flashes and different stretches where he's just lights out. Like the 3-point shot is automatic. And then he goes through these other periods where like he's just going downhill every time. All right. And I think he could come to like a better balance where he's hitting 3-point shots more consistently. And man, if he can kind of get close to that 40% range, which I feel like he's capable of that. If he's more consistent in terms of his attempts at it. I don't know if that will happen, but um, obviously that will help a lot if Kuminga can be the spacer out of those three guys. Draymond obviously showed a lot last season. Hopefully he still has that confidence kind of attached to his game so that moving forward, well, we can continue to see Draymond knock down open shots. And again, Trayce is just out in the open. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We have to see what he's going to do in the preseason. If a 3-point shot is in his game now, we don't know that. So because we don't know that, there's no way to say for certain. I think it's a little bit weird that Steve is talking about like, even though I see Kuminga as a 3, I don't necessarily want to put him at the 3. Because at the end of last season, he talked about how he'd like to try Kuminga more at the 3. So he's kind of always, he says one thing and then he says another. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I don't see why you can't try that combination, right? Preseason, regular season, try it. I think the Warriors defense is gonna flourish this season. I think that it's gonna be great. I think the Warriors have a lot of defensive pieces, and I think that this is going to be a much better season than a lot of people believe that it's gonna be, right? So because I feel that they have that room, that margin for error, they'll be able to try a lot of different things in the regular season if Steve is open minded enough to try them while you have good leads and stuff like this because you have great defense. So we'll see about that.
100%. I think I understand the vision with Steve. I think he's trying to find the best two-way combinations and the best lineups to manage spacing and defense, and the versatility, positional size. That's all such a challenge because we don't quite have enough players to fill those gaps necessarily. I think obviously you're gonna have Steph, and then you're gonna fill the remainder of it with maybe like Wiggins, Draymond, JK might be in there, Melton, and then you start to lose those like options at the two-way, right? So you see Wiggins and Melton are probably our best two-way players, and I think JK can get to that point as well this season if he takes a step defensively. So those would be 3, and then Draymond obviously is your anchor. But we don't have enough personnel, I think, to like feel comfortable running just 5 guys like Boston or 5 guys like Oklahoma City, right? Because those teams, they have Derek White, he's two-way. Jaylen Brown, he's two-way. Jason Tatum, he's two-way. Porzingis, he's two-way. Like you see these teams, they just have two-way players across the board. They don't even have to think game plan or scheme in terms of their lineups. It's just they throw those guys out there and they're just two-way. And the same thing with the Thunder, right? You got Caruso, SGA, Lou Dort, Chet, J-Dub, right? So there's some
Man,
teams, yeah.
I forgot about some of the moves some of the other teams have made, including OKC. I mean, they're going to be a powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, definitely some teams got better, and Warriors have their work cut out for them. Man, there's a lot of questions going into this season for sure.
Yeah, but I think ultimately, I believe we'll figure it out. Last season, we pretty much made all the right moves. Don't you feel like every season, like in 2021, and in 2023 and 4 specifically, I think 2022 is a bit of an exception because we established our identity so early that towards the end of the season, it didn't really matter. It was just about getting Steph healthy because he had his foot sprain. But for the most part, in 2021, 2023, 2024, I feel like we figured out and we clicked always at the end of the season. We always end the season strong because the schedule does ease up a little bit, but for the most part, it's because we're running our best combinations and our best lineups. So, like, for example, last season, right, we ran a lot of Trayce at the 5, right, towards the end of the year. A lot of Draymond Trayce combinations. JK was playing a lot as well. So that front court pairing, Wiggins, Draymond, JK, Trayce, any combination of those guys was almost always a positive. Were there some interesting things Kerr said in his TK interview? There was a few things. So he mentioned that he views JK as a 3, that, they've had a very rocky relationship. We'll get into JK's breakdown in a week or so, but, he spoke about that. He spoke about not feeling comfortable playing Trayce, Draymond, and JK together because there's not enough spacing. He brought up how the shooting guard position will be up for grabs and that it's not set in stone yet, that it's going to be a competitive environment in training camp to really get to that point.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. But I don't believe that. So if you know me, Jim, I've been you know who I think is going to start. It's going to be Pods. And not because I want him to start, but because I think that's who the organization's invested in.
Right.
And the PR that has been pumped out, the noise, the interviews, the media coverage, everything, it just feels like they're setting the fan base up. They're preparing us for Pods to start, even though they're going to say it'll be a competitive environment. And now I wouldn't be surprised if Melton starts. If Melton starts, to me, that's who I want because I think he's the best 3-and-D and just overall two-way player. Did you know how much of a positive the Sixers were the last 2 years when Melton was on the floor? They were a massive positive. So Melton needs to be out there. I think he's a veteran. He knows how to fit in. He's played, many different teams, many different rosters, locker rooms. Like, he has experience, and he can guard, man. This guy's a legit point of attack. I like Moody as well. I know that's a name that we brought up too. So Moody should be an option. I don't know if you've seen Moody's trajectory this offseason. He's looking like he's added a lot of artillery. You know what I'm saying? He's deep in that bag, man. I'm telling you, he's got some weapons now he can pull out because his jump shot and his ball handling, his overall shot creation is looking fantastic. You wouldn't even recognize him if you saw some of the stuff he was doing off the dribble, the step back threes, the pull ups,
You mean like pickup games or
crossovers.
something?
So yeah, these are mainly open runs, but he was going against Kevin Durant. He was going against Naz Reid, Chet Holmgren. So he was going against NBA players, some top guys, and he was delivering. He looked pretty good,
Right. Yeah. I mean, Moody, I've always liked Moody, but I don't know. He always gets lost in the shuffle, somewhere down the line. So
Right.
I don't know, man. I just don't see him kind of, unless he becomes that good where you just can't sit him. But Steve always finds a way to sit somebody. You know what I mean? And it always ends up being Moody. So, I mean, we'll see about that.
So we touched on JK. We touched on Pods a little bit. We touched on Moody. Now, back to Trayce. If you were to rank, like, the 4 young players going into next season in terms of how much they'll contribute, how would you rank them? I'll say JK 1 because I think he's going to start. He's going to be our second leading scorer. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. So from that standpoint, and I also expect a defensive step. If he doesn't take a defensive step, then his impact is going to be much less because he probably won't close as much. Maybe Steve might favor Kyle over him, right? So we need JK to take a solid step defensively. Not that he was a bad defender last year, but he wasn't good enough to close consistently. And especially at the playoff level, you need to have discipline and an understanding of how to be consistent. But I think
you need to have the best.
Playoffs,
you need to have the best.
The best options out there, yeah.
No, defensively, you need to have the best. It can't be like in your starting lineup. It can't be like somebody who's like inconsistent or something. Because if it's somebody inconsistent, then you're going to get inconsistent results. So that's a huge thing for JK for this upcoming season.
That and then so I would say JK 1. I would say now I'm torn between Pods and Trayce because I think Trayce, I could argue, has a bigger impact than Pods, even in less minutes. But the thing about Pods is I think they're going to really invest into him. And Pods did lead the team in plus minus last year. He does have the ability to shot create, handle the ball. He led the league in charges. He was first team all rookie. So Pods has a legit case. But Trayce's impact too can't be understated. So I would say maybe Pods 2A, Trayce 2B. Like I think they'll be really close. I think both had really good off seasons. Like from what I've heard, from what I've seen in summer league, they both played pretty well. Trayce kind of had a slightly rough start, but then he picked it up. Pods was a little up and down, but he also picked it up towards the end. They both looked really good. Both of them's bodies, they look like it like transformed a bit. Like Pods looks like he added like a good 10 pounds of upper body strength, and so did Trayce. Trayce looked leaner. He looked a little slimmer. He looked a little faster. Like I think Trayce also looked physically different. And I don't know you know this, Jim, that they played in Team USA training camp with
Of
the Olympic
course.
team. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they obviously had a huge summer, a lot of experience, a lot of kind of experience with some high level players, not just amongst themselves, because they do scrimmages at the Warriors facility. But they also had it like they played with some of the best players in the world, and they got to understand things at a higher level. I think one thing about Pods in particular, he does a lot of film work. Like he studies film really well. He really does a lot of studying from that standpoint, pinpointing where he can improve on certain areas that he would do differently, stuff like that. So that's something to take into consideration. But I would say Pods 2A, Trayce 2B, and then Moody. I just don't think Steve is going to play Moody as much as he deserves in terms of minutes, because I think Moody's looking like he's primed for a big step in year 4. But also because there's a logjam at the shooting guard. I mean, you have Melton, Heald, Pods, and yeah, I mean those three alone. And
Yeah.
you can even slot Steph at the 2. Steve has done that before. So I don't know. What do you think? You think that order, or do you see a different thing?
Um. Oh, that's a tough question. Um. It's a tough question because I don't know the progression of these players during the off season
That's
and
fair. That's
how
fair.
different they're going to look in the upcoming season. For example, if
Right.
Kuminga becomes like a much better defender with Stackhouse, guiding him and teaching him and all these things, right? That is a game changer. That changes
Mm.
everything about how I view Kuminga,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how that's going to play out. I'm hoping for the best. I hope he does really well, and there's continues to be this weird, complicated situation with Wiggins because they play the same position, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is going to happen with that? By the way, Wiggins, obviously, his father passed away not
Right.
too long ago, so man, like clearly he's been dealing with a situation with his father for a long time, and just may he rest in peace. I feel terrible for him. And I don't know. I hope he can find peace in his heart and come out really strong this season.
Hundred
I
percent.
have some of my own things going on, but I'll save that for another time. But I really feel for him, and again, like, yeah, I don't, and there continues to be this weird thing. You have to pay Kuminga. Obviously, there were some talks about contracts and whatever this offseason. But
Yes.
Wiggins
Yes.
plays his
Yes.
position and gets
Right.
paid, what, 25, 27 mil, something like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they need to come to a decision. And that decision largely is dependent on how Kuminga comes back looking this season. If he's a different player defensively, like, and the Warriors want to go with, a more futuristic plan that includes the core veterans still and all this kind of stuff, then they may have to trade Wiggins, because it makes no sense to have a guy. What, he's going to come off the bench and he's going to get paid 27 mil? That doesn't work. That makes no sense, right?
Right.
So
Right.
there is some. This is the year. Like, some decisions are going to have to be made, based on how the season starts out and how it's going to look and all this. So there's a lot to look forward to.
No doubt. So let's not put an order to it, because I think you laid it out really well in terms of like this offseason will play a huge part in terms of their individual development and collectively how they kind of work out and gel next season, because they're different skill sets, different improvements, different weaknesses, different strengths. So I think it'll kind of figure itself out. But let me ask you this: as far as Trayce goes, expectations. We talked about him being an anchor, playing within the motion offense. In terms of being more offensive minded, I know we talked a lot about the defensive end. In my mind, like if Trayce shows, notable growth on the offensive end, I do believe Steve would feel more inclined to play him, an extra 10 minutes a game, potentially, like go from maybe 18 to 28. We saw that last year, in fact, that there were times Trayce was playing around 25 minutes or so. So, and then in addition to him building up that overall strength that we saw, his body just kind of transformed a bit. How do you see, like, him taking a step offensively, if at all, next season? Do you see him doing that? And do you think Steve would be more open to playing him exclusively as our five? Because you remember this, Jim. Draymond last season could not hold up. And I was pointing this out. I was watching these games live, right? And during the live watches, I was like, why is he not running back on defense? Why, like, something's off. He's not playing with effort. He's not playing with intensity. And I noticed this for like 3 straight games. He comes on his podcast and says he's dealing with the back issue and it's flaring up again. And then he had to sit. So, like, that's a problem. Like, we can't play Dre at the 5 for an extended period of time and expect him to, get through the season healthy. Maybe, for stretches and bits and pieces and parts of the season, maybe. But for extended periods of time, I think that's detrimental to him and the collective as a team, because, he's going to break down, and then we're going to have to put someone in his position who may not even be ready yet because they're not in rhythm, right? So what are your thoughts on, like, Trayce being that 5 for us? Because I have him, if you look at the top of the expectations, I have him as a consistent rotation from a role standpoint and minute standpoint at center. Rotation, not starting. Like, I don't have him starting at center. But do you think there's a world where he plays so well and he has such an offensive step to where he does start at center?
Who would start at center if not Trayce?
I think they're going to start Draymond out of the fact that they want to play a little bit smaller and faster and with more space, because
Well,
I
that's
know
stupid.
where you're going to go with this, and you're right. But, like, Steve already said he doesn't want to start J.K., Draymond, and Trayce together. So if he doesn't do that, like, that means he's not playing Wiggins at the 2, which means someone has to play the 3 and someone has to play the 4. So I
Right.
think my prediction for the starting lineup, and give me yours actually too, the one that I've been saying all off season long. There's a difference between what I want and what I think. What I think is going to happen is Steph, Pods, Wiggins, JK, Draymond. That's what I think is going to happen. What I want to happen is either Steph, Melton, Wiggins, JK, Draymond, or Steph, Wiggins, JK, Draymond, Trayce. One of those 2 lineups. But I don't think Steve will do the latter. The only chance I see him doing the former is if Melton clearly outplays Pods. But I feel like the organization is so I'm telling you, like, the PR that we've covered over the last 2 months in this stream has been absolutely, like, he's done interviews with Slater. He's done interviews with baseball teams. Like, the guy's going around and he's talking about, how they're gonna replace Clay, and how, like, he said this is the best offseason of my life. Like, he's never taken a bigger step in his basketball life than this offseason. Like, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's good to be confident. It's good to speak highly and to be proud of the work that you put in. But it better translate, because if it doesn't, then there's going to be a wave of disappointment and a wave of potential backlash, because, Pods himself and Lacob have kind of prepped the fan base for that,
Well, that lineup where both JK and Wiggins are on the floor at the same time with Trayce and Draymond, that's like a combination that's been brought up last season as well as a possibility, right? But it really depends entirely on the shooting ability of these players. If they can, if they can shoot better, right? JK, can you shoot better? Can you be a little more consistent? Can you start to reach that as close to 40% range? If you can, then that spacing is less of a problem if you're wide open and you can punish the other team for leaving you open. Same
Right.
thing with Wiggins. He started off really cold. He struggled a lot, but then he started to come back to his career averages with the Warriors, down the stretch of the season, right? And so if he had the proper time this offseason to work, he didn't even play for Team Canada, right? So if he's back closer to the 39% that he had been shooting with the Warriors this season, I think that would also be less of an issue, right? So then they would have a lot of size in terms of JK, Wiggins, Draymond, Trayce, and again, Draymond, if he continues to shoot really well. So there's a lot of ifs here. If Trayce is capable of shooting, like we just don't know if that's the case. But in an ideal scenario, that lineup would have the most size and that would be most formidable from a defensive standpoint. Um, Especially if JK got way better and if he gets way better under better coaching. So that is a possibility. I wouldn't write that off. Again, like you're trying to start JK, you're paying Wiggins major starters money. Like it's tough. It's a weird situation. But if you can play them together, that would be so ideal. So I wouldn't rule that out. And the Warriors have so many players right now that they can do a lot of different options, and it could still be successful. Like Pods, I think Pods has a lot of potential. You know what I mean? Like he's really like a Swiss Army knife. And he talked about like cutting off those weird, floaters or
Floaters.
hook shots,
Yep.
whatever. And he's more efficient about that. And if he can better play make, which I hope he can, like that's a huge factor. I thought that
Right.
his lack of chemistry with Trayce was very concerning last season. His lack of ability to see people in the pick and roll was a major issue. I'm hoping that those things are improved. I'm hoping that the offense looks more dynamic than just fucking motion. So,
Right.
yeah, we don't
Right.
know, man. And so we
By
we
the
have
way,
we
to
have so
that
much to
point,
look forward to.
by the way, because you make a very good point about the offense evolving. I listened again to Steve's interview with the community last night. We really listened to it closely, and one of the things he said was with Clay gone, he really emphasized this. He's like, you know, yes, there's a void that we have to fill, but there's also something good we can take out of it. We can change how we play. We don't have to play the same way we have played in years past. There's a little bit more room for, branching out and changing things and trying something new. So Steve seems to be a little bit more open and a little bit more aggressive with like you said, kind of switching up the offense a little bit. Because again, Pods is not Klay Thompson. He's not a movement shooter coming off of pin downs, and he's not, zipping off of curls, ready to fire away. Like that's just not his game. Can he do it in a pinch or here and there? Yes, but I think Steve is legitimately looking to simplify and modernize the offense a little bit. Um, and I think because you look at the personnel with Pods, Melton, Buddy, like you got some dynamic, skill sets there. And Clay was a little less dynamic. Clay was a shooter. Clay could come off of screens. He had gravity. He was a sniper, yes, but he was high variance. He took questionable shots at times. He shot us out of games. He shot us in games, right? You didn't know what to expect from Clay on a game-to-game basis. But I think the personnel we have is a little bit more um, layered. They're a little bit more versatile, and I think that's a good thing. And I think Steve realizes that, and I think he's willing to be, much more open to adjustments, like you mentioned. So now with Trayce, do you? So one thing I remember him saying in particular was like putting the ball on the floor and looking to really attack, right? Especially in dribble handoff situations. Like, you know how Draymond would run those DHOs and then do a fake and then speed to the basket? Like, things like that where Trayce can run some misdirection or
It's like all he has. That's like the
Right.
only move he's got.
That might be the only thing. And you might be right about that. But even then, like a pop shot or like a floater is something he could add. Like, do you see any room for him to be like a double-digit scorer next year, with his added, and his improved off season like that? Because I think he has gotten better, to some degree. He definitely has, just based on what we saw in summer league and based on what he said he would work on. I would expect there to be some growth, but how much do you think?
Well, that depends on whether he's a starter or not. You don't think he'll be a starter. I think that
Mm-hmm.
he needs to be a starter because
Mm-hmm.
unless you want to stick Looney back in there. You know what I mean?
And
Like,
we can go on about Looney too. By the way, I don't know if you've if you've heard, but Loon is. I've been on this Looney thing for about a month and a half now. He is a different person. He's a different player.
mm-hmm,
I don't know
mm-hmm.
if you know, but he's been working on his three. He's been attempting pick and pop mid ranges. He's expanding his game to the perimeter now. He's lost 15 to 20 pounds, shed a lot of weight. Yeah,
That's good.
he's a different player. He's a different player. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So that's a I guess that's a possibility. If he wins the starting job again, I guess that would. But if Trayce is starting, I just don't see how he wouldn't average at least 10. It's so easy for him to score. Like he just, you know, like 3 straight pick and rolls, and he's got 6 points in the blink of an eye. So I think he can easily score in double digits if he gets the proper opportunities, if he's more aggressive, if there are switches, right? If he plays with Steph, there's going to be switches and mismatches. He's going to have some mouse, right underneath. And there were a lot of times where the Warriors wouldn't feed him the ball. So it's like he just wasn't directed to attack. So he wasn't as aggressive as I feel that he should have been in different times. And if he's more aggressive about those possessions, you know how Wiggins sometimes, or even Kuminga sometimes, they get these cross matches, right? Because they're doing all this action with Steph, and then they got to switch, and you end up with a smaller guy, and then that gives an advantage to either Wiggins or Kuminga, right?
right.
Imagine those opportunities for Trayce. That's a joke. That is he doesn't have to fade away and do all the he just rise up and dunk over him. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So will he have those opportunities? And if he does, yeah, so easily he can average double digits in points.
Okay. Well, let's go to the player projection. So, the player projection I have for him next year, I have him at around 19 minutes a game or so, a tick under 10 points, 9.7, 6.3 rebounds, 1.5 assists, about a block and a half a steal, 67% from the field. I do think he's going to take a couple threes here and there, so I do have a 3-point percentage of around 21, and I think his free throw is going to bump up to around 63%, and he's going to be a positive plus 74. Last season, he was like a plus 32, and which was surprisingly low. But I think part of why that was because he just didn't play enough minutes. Like if his minutes were more, you know, in the 20s instead of the teens or 10, 15, like I think he would probably have been closer to plus 50, plus 60. So I think next season he'll be a plus 70 or so, plus 80. And and these are probably more conservative because I think there's a world where he plays over. There's 100% a possibility that Trayce plays over 20 minutes and he's averaging double digits scoring. So this is more like kind of like a balanced prediction because I don't want to go too high or too low. But what do you think about this? This prediction? Would you change anything? Would you add anything? Like, what do you think?
No, I mean, these are your predictions. So, we'll see what happens with it. But for me, if he's the team's best anchor, if he's their best defender, if he's the best rim protector, if he's the best guy to switch and all these things, and we don't want, like you said, for Draymond to be run to the ground playing a bunch of center, I think that should be. I don't know. If Trayce is good enough, like I'm almost ready to dead the Draymond at the center thing. Unless they have the proper personnel, they might try Kyle Anderson. Who knows, right?
Right.
See how good that defense looks with Draymond and Slow Mo at the power forward center spots. So it really depends, but I don't want to see Draymond starting as center. All this, that's bullshit. Like you say you care about his back and his well-being and his, like, as he gets older and all these things, and then you're gonna stick him as a starter at center after seeing what happened last season. That doesn't make any sense. You want to
Mm-hmm.
protect him, and you want to make sure that he's fresh for the playoffs. So, this is why the Warriors got bigger, right? They have bigger players. They drafted a bigger player so that maybe Draymond doesn't have to do this center thing. And so hopefully they'll take full advantage of that. But in terms of Trayce, if he's the best, then it makes no sense to play him 19, 20 minutes, right? If he's your best anchor, then he's got to be up in minutes, like 25 or something. So, and he has to make sure that offensively he's not hurting the team, too much or something along those lines. Like they're fouling him or something, and he's not able to hit his free throws, something like this. That hurts the team. So you say 62.8%. I say that's not good enough. He shot closer to 70% in college. So why can't he get back to that? Maybe he just didn't get enough playing time. Maybe he just wasn't comfortable enough. Maybe they never really got him the ball and let him do anything, right, on his own.
Right.
And so he was never in rhythm. And maybe that's a part of the reason why his free throws fell off. Maybe because in college he shot 69, 68%, and then he drops off to 50 something in the NBA. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So hopefully he improves a lot from the free throw standpoint. I'm hoping to see closer to 70% than 60%. I think that's a big thing. The 3-point shot, again, I'm not even going to predict because I have no idea. I hope that he shoots, because I think he has a good shot on him, and I think he's capable of. You remember when what's his face on the Mavs, the rookie from last year? He shot like a 3 in the playoffs. I don't remember if it was Lively. Like, you remember he shot a 3? I don't remember if it was the finals or somewhere, but he shot a 3. It was a really important shot, and he hit it. It was super clean. And I was saying about him too, like, he has a really good shot on him. I have no idea why Jason Kidd just put that under the rug and never used it. You know what I mean? So if a guy can do that, you should try to implement that and see if he helps your team even more. It just makes your team more dynamic if your center can shoot, obviously. So I never understood why Jason Kidd never used Lively in that regard. And I think that Trayce can hit threes in a game. So again, I'm hoping for the best. We'll see.
No, I agree. So outside of the free throw percentage, you'd be on point with everything else for the most part.
Not the minutes. If he's playing great defense and if he's the best anchor on the team, then he should be getting like 25, not 19.
Okay. And what about his field goal percentage? Because last year he shot around 70%. So
right.
do you think he'll be more the only reason I have him at a couple percentage points lower is because I think he'll be taking a little bit more jumpers potentially, and more importantly, he'll just be more aggressive and he'll take more shots. So I just think what comes with that is just a little bit less efficiency,
Yeah, that's totally possible. So if he's doing all that, if he gets a little more opportunities in the post especially against smaller players or something along those lines, yeah, I mean, there's going to be times where he's going to miss more if he has to create more on his own. I really feel like he has really great handles for his size, and if he's at the center spot and if he's matched up against some slow center or something, he can really blow by those guys. So will he get those opportunities? Will he be more aggressive?
Right.
There's just so much to look forward to. So yeah, the field goal, that's totally fine.
Perfect. Okay, and I do expect him to take the occasional corner 3. I do think he'll take some jumpers next year and experiment with that a bit, because I think that's something he mentioned he'd work on this off season. So
yeah, that's the biggest. That's one of the biggest factors in terms of how long can he stay on the floor, how effective can he be offensively, all those kinds of things.
Now, would you change the assists, points? Like, do you see him playing more than just 19 minutes? Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, I think Stackhouse will love him. I think the coaching staff, again, Steve has a great coaching staff around him now. We've been harping about the need to replace Mike Brown, a real defensive-minded coach who put everything together and everybody was on a string and they were unstoppable. And that's why they won that championship, is because they had their defense in amazing order. and they had just the right amount of pieces to get it done. You know what I mean? Like they had just enough. Like if they were missing
Right.
either GP2
Right.
or Otto for the finals, like that would have been much tougher. So and all of that was just that system that they played the whole season in terms of defensively. It was ingrained into them. So I
Mm-hmm.
think Trayce will be a huge part of that, and if he can be, then yeah, I think a guy like Stackhouse will be forceful in his message, like insist that the best defenders be on the floor, given
Right.
that that's his job now.
Right. Right. No doubt. No doubt. How do you think, just to round out the breakdown, the playmaking ends up? Because I know the minutes, I think you're right. It'll depend on really the vision and what his role initially is, if he can play into a bigger one, and how Stackhouse views him. Because I think Stackhouse will have a very powerful and influential voice in that locker room and that coaching staff, and I think he can really emphasize, um, the defensive end and playing more positional size, playing more, big lineups, Trayce at the 5, and especially against certain matchups, I think he would be more appropriate to be out there. Now, as far as the playmaking goes, what do you think about that?
Well, he's a very capable playmaker, and I think if he actually had the ball in his hands where he's creating more for his teammates, and if he gets better at the DHOs with somebody like Steph, that would obviously increase his assist numbers. I think he can easily average, again, if he gets something like 23 to 25 minutes per game, he could average close to three assists easily, in my
Wow.
opinion.
Okay.
1.5, I think, is low. You think
Okay. Okay.
about, I mean, look at Kevon Looney. Kevon
Mm,
Looney, sure, now he sets more screens and he does more DHOs, right, than finishing himself.
right.
So he's bound to pick up a few more assists playing with Steph. But he played 16 minutes last season and he averaged 1.8 assists.
Uh-huh.
I think Trayce is a better passer than him.
Okay. No, I think Trayce is definitely a better passer. I think Loon, while he may be more experienced and comfortable in certain passing situations and positions just because of the reps he's had and playing in the system for however many years, I think Trace's ability to actually make certain types of passes, like the corner reads, finding cutters, his live ball passing is also very good too. So yeah, I think Trayce is probably a more versatile passer for sure. Yeah, man. And then just the defensive end, like, do you think about a block and a half is right, or do you think maybe he'll get it closer to 2? Like, how do you see that shaking out?
If he's playing 19 minutes per game, 1.4, I think, is probably something like on the dot. If he plays more minutes, I feel like he'll get closer to 2. I feel like as a rookie, he got a lot of blocks kind of shaved
Mm-hmm.
away, right? I remember games where he got blocks and like it wasn't in the stat sheet. I was like, what is this? Like how this is so weird. But I don't think the stat sheet, like the stat keepers are perfect in all their stat keeping, to be honest. But yeah, and he's more, last season it was more about getting to the shots and deterring it than always blocking it, even though he's very capable of blocking shots. But if he kind of studied some of these players that he had to go against, and he understands their patterns better, it's possible for him to get up to 2 blocks per game.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. Um, I think it's gonna be very interesting to see, man. This breakdown was very thorough. This was a really good job. We went into a lot of detail, man. A lot of detail. So shout out to Jim, man. Chat, give him a round of applause.